Well, good day, folks, and welcome back to The Secret Solve. This is the program where I go through the book The Secret by Byron James, and I assess what's going on in the various images in the book, and also I read the text. So today we're up to a story called The Mugwumps. The Mugwumps in the Secret on page 146 and page 147. The Mugwumps, otherwise known as the filibusterous gubernatorious people. And so let's just go on and get into the Mugwumps. I'm going to start out with what I believe to be the most credible information about the Mugwumps. On page 147, you have a figure behind a lectern at some sort of party event, hats in the air, balloons in the air, signs in the air. Could be a political convention, could be a campaign speech, or it could be something else. The Sentinel phrase that has been uttered and that we all remember from the Richard Nixon Tricky Dick administration is that of the I am not a crook. Richard Nixon famously is in the position below and says, I am not a crook. Well, where did that happen? Well, it happened at Disney's contemporary resort, originally named Tempo Bay Hotel and previously known as the Contemporary Resort Hotel. It's located in Walt Disney World, Bay Lake, Florida. We're talking about Orlando again. On November 17th, 1973, the Contemporary was the site of what would become one of the most famous press conference statements in modern American politics, where President Richard Milhous Nixon declared, I am not a crook. Nixon, whose job approval rating had been declining steadily and over a year due to the ongoing Watergate scandal, made the statement during an appearance at the Associated Press Managing Editors Association annual convention, at which he had held a live 1 hour televised press conference. Following an earlier questions on Nixon's taxes, Nixon addressed claims, and he I've earned every cent, and in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. People have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I am not a crook. I've earned everything I've got. Less than 1 year later, facing almost certain impeachment and removal from office, Nixon announced his resignation on August 8, 1974, and it became effective the following day. So I think this is pretty credible evidence of this story being about Richard M. Milhous Nixon, and that the association of the Mugwumpery has to do with another potential figure. But let me finish up with Richard Nixon, first of all, because Richard Nixon may indeed give us connectivity to California, where he ran for office. And the mentioning of the dirty tricks in the Nixon administration could be anything from Watergate back to the very first campaign in which maybe a dirty trick was done. And you can look at the 1950 United States Senate election in California. And this is probably his first dirty trick. And it involves none other than a Roosevelt. And we've went through this before where we have talked about Roosevelts, right? Well, at this particular election, there was two Democratic candidates and two Republican candidates. And to make a long story short, the Democratic candidates lost in this election, and it's mainly because after the pink sheet came out, and the pink sheet's probably the dirty trick, and so Eleanor Roosevelt arrives in a rally in Long Beach, California, and she's there to support a Roosevelt and the Douglas. Douglas was running for the Senate seat and against Nixon. And here they sent out a press pink sheet of paper that basically showed the voting record of the Democrats. And although Douglas was complaining about whispering campaign allegations that her husband was Jewish and that was causing people to shy away from voting for her, the end result is that James Roosevelt lackluster campaign, and the Douglas backers did not get the turnout they needed for the Democrats to win the election. And this could possibly be as a result because Truman decided not to campaign in the state for these two candidates. But anyway, so there became a lot of name calling. And so somebody had called Richard Nixon Tricky Dick, and they referred to him as Pee Wee as well. So there's this whole exchange between Nixon where he says, a reporter reports and says that Nixon says he was a young man in a dark shirt in an allusion to Nazism. He inquired, "Did she say that? Why, I'll castrate her." Campaign official Bill Arnold joked that it would be difficult to do that. And Nixon replied that he would do it anyway. Anyway, Nixon basically and her got into this war of words, etc. The polls showed Nixon well ahead. His campaign did not let up. A fundraising solicitation warned that right now Nixon is losing, not enough money. And they put the sign up in the skywriting, but they actually had plenty of money, and he wasn't actually losing at the time. So Douglas's actor husband, Melvin Douglas, on tour with the play Two Blind Mice throughout the campaign, spoke out on behalf of his wife, as did movie stars Myrna Loy and Eddie Cantor. Nixon had several Hollywood personalities supporting him, including Howard Hughes, Cecil B. DeMille, and John Wayne. Well, we just met John Wayne in a previous story. It's amazing how these stories kind of overlap a little bit. Okay, so I could go on talking about this 1950 United States, but that's kind of, I think, where the first dirty trick, whether we need to figure out that you're Belinda or perhaps this Roosevelt connection to where she was appearing and giving the speech in Laguna Beach, I think it was, Long Beach. Whether we need to be looking at Long Beach, I don't know. If we go back to Ab Scam, we get the abs. This is the second appearance in the back of the book of the Ab Scam scandal. And since it's centering around California and Florida again, I'm just going to go back and repeat the information that I put out earlier about the Florida guy that was involved in Ab Scam. And the reason I'm going to do that is because we're going back to the same district. We're going back to the same district in Florida. And so Ab Scam, the one that was from Florida, is U.S. Representative Richard Kelly. We talked about Richard Kelly. He represented the Florida's 5th district. The 5th district that the Ab Scammer represented includes well, I don't know. I don't know what it. Let's see. Where was it? Where is the district? Southern District of Florida. We went to we went to Gainesville. Gosh, I had this. He attended a one-room school in Crystal Springs, in Pasco County, Florida. Well, anyway, I think the Ab Scammer again is this Florida guy, Richard Kelly, and he was from, he was in the House of Representatives. So anyway, although the 5th district in Florida is not really, is putting me in Jacksonville. Ha! Jacksonville. Oh, all right. back to Jacksonville. Okay, so we got Abscam again. Not sure which one of the Abscammers we're talking about. The Potomac River obviously is Washington D.C. reference because that's where the White House is. Going through a couple of other things, it mentions Harry S. Truman. Harry S. Truman famously said, I think he had the line that was, "If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen." This is attributed to Harry Truman. Truman's another president. He was preceded by FDR, and he was succeeded by Eisenhower. We talked about Eisenhower earlier and how Eisenhower was involved in that. Truman, comes from a haberdashery family. He comes from Independence, Missouri. If you like my idea of a potential Kansas City, he was involved in and part of the Manhattan Project and the atomic bomb because that happened during his administration. He was born in Lamar, Missouri. He worked at the Kansas City Star. He also worked on the Ashland Topeka Railroad and the National Bank of Commerce in Kansas City. He met Bess Wallace. He has some connectivity to a zinc mine in Oklahoma. Served in the National Guard, World War I, Officers Reserve Corps, Jackson County Judge. Well, we know that Jackson has a little bit to play here. So maybe the connection here is just to the Jackson County. He was vice president. You can read about and try to figure out what connections Truman has. The chicken in every pot is attributed to Hoover, but apparently Hoover never actually really said this, but it was the Republican Party's ad, an attempt to sway voters in an election. It kind of backfired because many Americans blamed the Republican president for the problems. And decades later, when Kennedy was running for president, he dredged up the chicken in every pot slogan all over again. And he attributed the quote to Hoover, expanding the original slogan to include twice as many chickens as before in a speech in Blounteville, Tennessee. So that's the chicken in every pot. Can go back to Kennedy, it can go back to Hoover, etc. The Mugwump is also, the Mugwumps were instrumental in getting elected a few presidents in the past. And the Republicans, Mugwumps, which first started out this whole thing, assisted in supporting Grover Cleveland in the presidential election of 1884. So the Mugwumpery actually starts all the way back in 1884 with Grover Cleveland. Well, we know Cleveland was a place where one of these was found, and so there's, I think, the where you get to finally get Cleveland involved in this. There's some famous Mugwumps out there. You can look at the Charles Francis Adams Jr., president of the Union Pacific Railroad and American Historical Railroad Association, Henry Adams, Charles William Eliot, which would get you to Boston at Harvard University. And so the idea is that the Mugwump is instrumental in getting people elected. The dirty trickery was Nixon, but I honestly think the biggest point in this whole story of the Mugwumps is, and it's because of the size of the figure on 147 and the significance of the peace fingers in the air and the Nixon, and the most famous quote from the Nixon administration is, "I'm not a crook." And it says under the history, Mugwumps are descended from the Swedish Nixon. Although Nixon wasn't actually Swedish, I don't think. I think he was English. But anyway, the only other thing is that the Mugwump is an Allegonian word meaning a person of importance or a war leader. And there used to be an organization in New York called the Allegonian Society. And so if you like that, there's a possibility. So I'm trying to figure out what the pretzel knot is in the judicial gavel, and I don't know if this was something about the Nixon being impeached and the gavel. I haven't really figured out what the twisted knot gavel means, and if it came out of some political uh, because it's not Fort Knox, as in Fort Knott, right? So the twisted handle gavel, um, and maybe it's a Celtic knot. Uh, is that a Celtic knot? What kind of knot is that? Is it a pretzel knot? The twisted, the knot. Let's just look up pretzel invented. See if that gets us anywhere. Historians believe that it was created in 610 AD by monks in a monastery in southern France. The three empty holes represent the Christian Trinity. So, the pretzel knot. Is it the pretzel knot? Nope, it's not. There's only, is there three or only, is there two? It's not, this isn't really a real pretzel knot because there's not the three. So it can't be a pretzel knot, but there's got to be, I don't know, something to do with this knot in this gavel handle. And it's got to refer to something, and I haven't been able to figure out what it is. Maybe it's a certain type of knot, slip knot. I mean, it reminds me of a pretzel, but a slip knot in a handle of gavel, a gavel handle. I just think there's something to this because this image appears in the book a number of different times, and I haven't been able to figure out this one. So the whoopee cushion, which is mentioned in the range up here, wherever you found, they are the whoopee cushion upon the great seat of government. Well, the whoopee cushion, dates back to the 1930s in the J.E.M. Rubber Company of Toronto, Ohio, or excuse me, Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And it was numerous practical jokes, and the owner of the SS Adams Company, with was the one that uh, popularized it. The Johnson Smith Company was a Chicago, Illinois-based novelty and gag gift company that sold X-ray goggles and were largely responsible for distributing the whoopee cushion. So there's the Chicago whoopee cushion connection. The SS Adams, maybe I should go look at my ab scammers or my other people a little closer in the Mugwumps because Charles Francis Adams Jr. is a Mugwump. And so since Adams, oh, well, here it is. Adams was born in Boston in 1935, and he's the great grandson of President John Adams. So I think that's just another connection and confirmation of Boston. If we look at the Adams family and the other Adams that we were talking about, and this Henry Adams, who was a Mugwump, otherwise known as Henry Brooks Adams, American historian, member of the Adams political family. He was born in Boston. So I think these are just two more confirmations of Boston and Chicago that can be derived from looking at who the Mugwump is and was. And so that's how you use the back of the book. This is how you use the back of the book. You find out, the whoopee cushion. You find out who popularized the whoopee cushion. Then you go look at the other story that they're referencing, which is the Mugwumps and who they were. And then you find the commonality between the information about the Mugwump and the information about the whoopee cushion. And by doing this, you can set yourself on the path of finding out what these people were talking about. And I'm not even, I mean, I didn't go to the ab scammers, but Anyway, all right, folks. Thanks so much for joining in on the Secret Solve again today, where we've talked about the filibusterous gubernatoriuses. And like I said, my most poignant information from this for a new solve location, not Boston, Chicago, Cleveland, is the information that might be provided in here by the Twisted Gavel, which I've yet to identify, and the final speech of Nixon, where he makes this famous statement in Orlando, Florida, at Walt Disney World, or no, at a hotel on Walt Disney World's property. Anyway, and we've talked so many times about Kissimmee, Florida, about the politicians that were involved in setting up and establishing Walt Disney World as a separate self-rule part of Florida, which DeSantis is now reversed, by the way. They've taken away that privilege because of all of the homosexuality activity that's at Walt Disney World. Similar to what was happening in Montreal back when Mayor Drapeau cut down all the trees. I mean, it's, basically. Unfortunately, I think for Mr. DeSantis, a few of these things, if he runs and becomes a nominee for president, are going to be difficult on his record. But we're setting up for another political showdown like we've never seen before. I don't know if these signs in the background of this are just to point you to the Hollywood sign. And there's several of these that have a sign in them. And this hot air balloon over Nixon, I don't know if that's the Goodyear blimp or what we're supposed to get out of it. It honestly reminds me of the balloon from The Wizard of Oz, or The Voice of Oz, or something to do with The Wizard of Oz, is what that reminds me of. But all right, folks, I've had 22 minutes of fun with the Mugwump, and next I will move to the spirit of 76, E pluribus pluribus. Oh, did I just mention that I thought that the balloon reminded me of the balloon in The Wizard of Oz? And the next page, I get the spirit of 76, and it's E pluribus pluribus. Was there a famous line from The Wizard of Oz where the wizard is standing around and he says E pluribus pluribus? I may have to go watch that movie again just to see if I can find that line. But until then, join me next time when I talk about the spirit of 76. This is also the second time we've had 76 mentioned. Because do you not remember, like earlier when I talked about that archaic song about midnight and the werewolf, and the leader of the band and his band's name was something 76? Is that coincidence? I just don't know. Well, hey, Jeff, glad you could join in. I'm just about wrapping up the presentation on the Mugwumps, where we intimately got to know our wonderful leader of Nixon. And anyway, so now it's on to bigger and better things, I think. In the image on 147, by the way, I think somebody might be actually flipping off Nixon in that image. And we didn't mention the Checkers speech that famously helped him. We didn't mention that Mr. Nixon went to the Navy. I don't think we mentioned that he went to Duke Law School either. And remember we had all this information about Duke and Durham and the Filthy Hobbit, and perhaps one of the necromancers being Mrs. Duke and Patty Duke. I mentioned Patty Duke right earlier. And wasn't Tricky Dick's wife's name Pat? So, I don't know. I'm just trying to break my arm, patting myself on the back here. Oh, I was going to finish up 2 minutes ago, but I'm still going. All right, folks, that about covers Richard Nixon. You can Google Richard Nixon, but I think the most poignant part of that is the connection to Walt Disney World, where the most famous words that ever come out of Richard Nixon's mouth happened at Disneyland. Well, at a resort anyway. It wasn't actually Disneyland. It was a hotel where he was at a convention. And I didn't even know that. And I mean, when he made that statement, I was 6 years old. But still, we all know that Richard Nixon held up his, peace sign and said, "I am not a crook." I mean, it's in our lexicon, and yet most of us don't know where those words came from his mouth. I didn't know until today that it was at Walt Disney's hotel. So I don't know. If nothing else, spending time with the book The Secret is sending me back in time to some things I remember that maybe I don't have the most accurate historical perspective of, and to get more enhanced perspective of these things that happen in history will assist me. I don't know how, but it just gives me a broader knowledge of events that happened. So anyway, all right, I appreciate the time. I will be back in a few minutes when I queue up the information I have previously looked up on the Spirit of 76. In stream. In